Et une autre preuve que le contenu qu'on vous présente aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas un contenu inspiré par les oligarches et les méga compagnies. Si vous avez vu les titres de nos sessions, personnellement, jamais je serais arrivé avec des titres comme ça ou avec des sujets comme ça. Mais c'est ça que j'aime ici, quand l'intelligence artificielle rencontre l'industrie créative. Et le prochain panel ne fait pas écart à cet aspect. Rien que de lire l'énoncé, je suis déjà en voyage. Puis je vais vous le lire. Partout dans le monde, le fascisme gagne du terrain, tandis que les nouveaux seigneurs techno-féodaux déploient des infrastructures d'IA écocidaires au service d'un ordre néolibéral implacable. Cette domination écrase les consciences et enferme nos imaginaires dans la répétition d'un cauchemar dystopique. C'est pour ça que je fais appel directement à Pia, qui va être la modératrice de ce panel. Pia est compositrice intermédiaire, chercheuse interdisciplinaire.
Indisciplinaire. Indisciplinaire.
Indisciplinaire, waouh. Merci de me rediscipliner. Directrice du développement Arts et Sciences à la Société des Arts Technologiques de Montréal, la SAT. D'ailleurs, merci pour la SAT qui pilote cet événement. Le travail de Pia explore les possibilités créatives à l'intersection des sens, de la physicalité et de la spatialité. Waouh, tout un programme, Pia.
That's it.
Écoute, bienvenue.
Merci.
Je vais te laisser présenter les panélistes.
Absolument.
Et je vais m'asseoir sur le 16 passager et écouter tout ça.
Tout à l'heure, merci. J'ai invité nos trois panélistes à me rejoindre sur scène. Donc, nous avons Fenwick McKelvey. And I'm going to speak English because my panel is a mainly English-speaking panel, so deal with it. So, Fenwick McKelvey here is an associate professor in Information and Communication Technology Policy in the Department of Communication Studies at Concordia University. He's the co-director of the Applied AI Institute and leads matching agencies at the Milieux Institute. Next, Sarah McKenzie is a cultural strategist, journalist, and media arts curator based in Montreal, working at the intersection of art, technology, and social good. She currently works with the Digital Arts Festival MUTEC as the Director of Creative Development and the Director of the MUTEC Forum. And the MUTEC Forum is a platform dedicated to exploring, developing, and showcasing creative technologies for artistic research, creation, and interdisciplinary collaboration. She's also a documentary filmmaker working with iStill Film, and is co-curating the upcoming Feel the Sound exhibition at the Barbican Centre in the UK. And last but not least, Arshia Soban is a Vancouver-based interdisciplinary researcher and artist. Currently, he's a PhD student in the Meta Creation Lab for Creative AI at Simon Fraser University. His research explores the intersection of non-Western art practices and generative AI, uncovering new creative possibilities while examining biases and broader cultural implications. That's our panel.
We can clap.
So, as you could hear and as you could read from the presentation, we started with this phrase, fascism is on the rise, right? And I would like to apologize for these words that might be inappropriate because, indeed, fascism is not on the rise. It is here, at our doors, 60 kilometers to the south. And more tragically, it is also in our minds. And how it lives in our minds and how we could resist to it is what we are going to speak about in this panel. But first, if you think that I'm exaggerating or maybe overstating things, by using the word fascism. Well, for starters, don't come and speak to me because you won't be well received. Also, I have bad news for you in this case because that means you are in denial and you should improve your pattern recognition skills, which is what AI is about, right? So to illustrate my point, I will just give you like what I saw this morning when I checked my social media feeds, right? Just 3 things. First thing, I heard the news that I'm getting permanently banned from traveling to the US unless I change my passport gender marker back to male, which I will not do. And then I saw a horrific AI-generated video of Trump Gaza, all caps, where the worst possible artistic taste combines with the most shameless imperialistic project. It's kind of, you know, like giving the Hitler's Lebensraum, but making for ugly billionaires vibe, right? And then there was another AI video showing Trump sucking Elon Musk's toes being broadcasted in US federal buildings by hackers. That sets the stage, right? So it's a lot. It's a lot in just spending 15 minutes on Facebook, right? That's why we're at it. So my question is, how do we fight back, okay? And how do we do it from our field? And I think that our field here is really the imaginaries. It's really the storytelling. That's what we do, right? And that might seem, you know, not so strong, but it's actually important, I think. Because, you know what, when Donald Trump, what he does when he speaks about Governor Justin Trudeau, for example, or when he renames the Gulf of Mexico, or when he turns a genocidal project into a resource development opportunity, this is all storytelling. And storytelling is very powerful, actually. Because, actually, storytelling is what makes us act as humans. It's what makes us wage wars, but also it's what makes us build networks of solidarity. So, as I said, storytelling, I think, is our main tool as artists and entertainers. So we not only have available means to fight back, but we also have a responsibility towards the futures that we can build. And in particular, with the rise of AI, which is the topic of today, our means of action, as well as those of the fascist propaganda, are multiplied. And I think that especially when we work, as most of us do, in the field of digital creativity, because there is no other place where technologies and storytelling interact more, right? So the questions that we will discuss together with you will be the following. How does these imaginaries found technologies? And how, in reverse, how do technologies shape our imaginaries? So our panelists will discuss this question by focusing on ethical aspects like intellectual property, cultural bias, or the ecological impact. Because right now, the current implementations of AI are really, really, really bad on these aspects, and we cannot trust the current corporate overlords in power to move things in a more desirable way. However, AI is not an inevitable agent moving independently from human action, like artificial general intelligence. That's not a real thing, right? It's a myth. It's an invisible and 3.0, but it doesn't actually have an agency in itself, but it just reflects the actual choices of a couple of ruthless, delusional, and honestly mediocre cis white men. And what brings us together today with our distinguished panelists is a conviction that we can have an actual action by tracing diverse paths of resistance. And now I will let them talk, tell you about what they think in this direction. So Arshia.
Thank you so much, Pia. So I don't think I can keep up with the political pace, but I'm going to present a case that hopefully will show how some of the promises of corporate AI is absolutely false. And of course, it's not that difficult to show that the universality of the benefits of generative AI provided by the corporations is not benefiting everybody, and it's not as accurate as it is promoted. But I think presenting a focused case study can help showing how drastic the consequences can be. My practice is Persian calligraphy, which is based on Arabic script, and that is a very important element in many countries. And of course, the first thing I do with generative AI is trying to generate some Persian calligraphy with it. And it fails miserably in a very interesting way. DALL-E 3, with its promise of exceptional accurate images, if you try to generate anything in Arabic, you will get very sophisticated compositions that are just fake Arabic. Forms that do not depict any accurate script. It does it in a very confident way. And it is very interesting that it resembles the way Arabic script was misrepresented throughout history, from Middle Ages and Renaissance in the paintings used as decoration without any depiction, used as pseudo-Arabic, and later on in the 19th century as in Orientalist paintings, depicting the reality but just misrepresenting the language and showing pseudo-Arabic. And apparently we have not really made any progress in some aspect. We haven't really learned anything with all shiny new technology. We are seeing the same misrepresentation over and over. And of course, it's deeper than just a formal misrepresentation. This is from a recent study with a long list of prompts for DALL-E 3, just to try to generate something accurate in Arabic, the simplest elements like single letters or very simple words. Of course, it fails. It's a 100% failure case in terms of presenting the script accurately, but it's deeper than that. The way it represents everything is old and ancient, and it looks like you're looking into the history as if it's not a domain that is alive anymore, and it's visually very obvious in that sense. There are some more drastic examples of that, just associating the whole domain with lands that are abandoned or buildings that are destroyed or in general in decay. So there are serious consequences in that sense for culture, cultural representation, which is not just a form of that art form. And I don't want to stay within that, just showing the biases, because it's easy. It's easy to show that it does a terrible job with this, and there are serious consequences. So I'm gonna show one of the alternatives that I personally found useful, and that is going back to the data set. First of all, I don't want a system that works for everything. I just want a system that works for this domain properly. And I need to go back and have the freedom to decide what I represent in the data set, and that is the core elements of the calligraphy. This is a data set that was created a couple of years ago, 60,000 samples, but each and every one of them was created and checked to make sure that it's representing calligraphy in an accurate way. And the results were great, but along the way we had a lot of decision-making involved, many of them very intuitive, but not arbitrary. The decisions are actually grounded in the traditional practice of calligraphy, which is all the traditional calligraphers practicing how letters connect to each other. Which is kind of hard to justify when you're outside of the domain, but it makes total sense. And that data set creation allows me to incorporate that kind of tacit knowledge into the whole pipeline. The results are obviously better than what big data AI systems can do. They can generate accurate calligraphy, and it can actually go beyond the data set, and it can generalize all the patterns and the complexities of calligraphy. And not only that, it opens up new creative possibilities. It opens up space for new expressive modes and new modalities inside that script, which takes a lot of time for just sense-making to understand this new fusion. So I'm going to wrap up quickly here. It has always been a search for alternative pathways outside of what is available, the status quo, what is presented by the by the corporate AI. And these alternatives, for me, they have the way it has worked is when I can integrate domain knowledge into the process, when I can integrate all the tacit knowledge, which is culturally situated somewhere along the way, ideally from the data set, then creating the generative model and working with it. But of course, this is one example, this is one approach, and when it's culture at stake, we are talking about communities, we are talking about collective action, and then it becomes what kind of technologies are available for them, what kind of tools are available, what education is available to those communities, and it becomes more than just personal efforts into that, and I think it ties it to the idea of AI Commons and how that is designed, and how that can serve communities who has not been traditionally part of the conversation of the AI development. I'm going to bring it back to you.
Thank you so much, Arshia. So, thanks, and I think that was a very natural transition between what you said and like the connection that you just did between like the situatedness of like individual creation based on a situated kind of culture, which is like in particular not Western-centric, and how it connects with the commons. So I think that Fenwick we will investigate more this question of intellectual property and the commons. So the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to say thanks for allowing me to be here and to be a bit provocative in trying to raise, I think, a tension that's probably affecting many people in the room, which is this relationship between artificial intelligence and intellectual property. And really what I want to put forward is the tension that intellectual property might no longer be the right vehicle to protect what we think of these practices of creativity. And how do we think of ways of being and being together, commonalities that Ashra is speaking to, that because of AI, we have to now take more seriously. And this is a lot of the work that we're thinking about and thinking through at my group, Machine Agencies. And so I say this, and I want to really begin with an example from a recent AI startup that we've heard, many people might have heard of from China by the name of DeepSeek. And I think DeepSeek's amazing because it's simultaneously worthless, but really worthwhile to talk about. And I think it really points to the tension that we have in the room right now. So DeepSeek is something that a lot of people are freaking out about, and they're freaking out about it for a bunch of different reasons. NVIDIA is freaking out about it because they're able to train a new model without using the same levels of resources, the same number of GPUs that typically large AI requires. And all of a sudden, there's this big debate about whether and how we're doing AI is correct, and DeepSeek is really making this point. But what I find sort of fascinating is that it's also exposing a lot of questions about who and how DeepSeek was trained and who's copying who and where does originality come from in the first place. Now, the allegation is that DeepSeek is relying on a type of technique called distillation, which means that you can take one AI model and distill it down to another AI model, which allows you to copy it. Now, of course, then OpenAI, one of the larger firms, is quite concerned and has raised allegations that part of DeepSeek has been copied from their own proprietary models. Now, this to me points to this kind of real tension around intellectual property right now because OpenAI has been accused of copying intellectual works from artists and creatives, and then they're suddenly worried that their own property is proprietary and then uncopyable. And this is something which really is front and center because I'm reminded of a lot of the activism around artists in the United Kingdom right now, which are concerned about reforms to UK copyright law, which would exempt training large AI models from the copyright regimes. And so there's an album just released yesterday in Silence, and I think this really speaks to both the kind of problem, but also my concern that the solution is just going to be more copyright and more turn to intellectual property, when what we might see in DeepSeek and in OpenAI is that this thing that we're valuing so much, these large AI models, might actually be worthless, which is going to create huge problems for those looking to get a check for licensing or having your content licensed for a model, as well as large governments who've invested in artificial intelligence as if it's going to lead to this next productivity boom, when in fact, these models might be inherently just easy to copy and something that really advances and works not through traditional systems of intellectual property, but through other forms of creativity, which is why I think this really showcases how they're worthless but worthwhile in helping us understand how AI depends on and so integral to this idea of the commons. So, what if AI requires us to actually really think about how we approach and reapproach the knowledge commons? And I think that that's the central debate for me right now, is how regulation can understand the relationship between creativity and the conditions that enable that creativity, and that those conditions might be ill-fitted more so than ever by intellectual property. Now, are we going to do this? Most likely not, given how we've been discussing, how we've been approaching the debates around AI and intellectual property. What I've been looking at is actually a lot of the consultations that have gone into how copyright law, which is something that's seen as quite central to the arts, is going to adapt or respond to artificial intelligence. And this, you can see the kind of stakeholders who's being involved. So this is some of the work we've seen in the US. We've also done work in Canada, and well, there's also similar discussions happening in the United Kingdom. In all three, there's this really strong emphasis on talking about the work that's taking place. This relationship is either copying, training, or stealing. And this is, I think, really the important stakes here is the verbiage we're using, how we're talking about these models and the relationships to each other really kind of is part of these imaginaries that Pia was speaking to at the start of the presentation. And how do we actually start pushing past the kind of conventional terms that we're using here to think about this relationship between creativity and artificial intelligence? The strategies that most often come up are kind of one of three. Either there's a proposition that all content will be licensable, so that what we're going to do is create some sort of gigantic meta blockchain so that any type of content that's used by an AI model can be recorded, logged, and then the creator is being remunerated. This could work unless you start realizing that the models themselves might not be worth anything, so no one's going to get paid. There's a second derivative version of this where we're thinking about these ideas around data cartels or these kind of collective rights, which is a similar problem. Or, and the last point is that large tech firms are trying to very much undermine the very conditions of the knowledge commons to make them just as kind of on-demand access to training data. All three of these aren't viable ways of trying to respond to this problem that AI poses for the future and longevity of what I think of as the knowledge commons, or this idea of what are those conditions that allow creativity to take place. Now, whether you call it the general intellect or collective intelligence or the commons, those terms matter for the debate, but really what's central is to try to understand there's certain conditions of possibility that allow us to be creative, and that's what AI has exposed, is that kind of ability and learning from that, which makes AI models valuable, is what we need to protect. And that becomes, I think, the central question of what I see as the future of AI and how might we look towards creating different ways of creating both ways of living in the commons that has created artificial intelligence and culture itself. How do we think about flourishing and surviving, as well as thinking about ways of existing and preserving creative practices that are no longer dependent upon these structures of copyright and intellectual property, which ultimately might be undermining and leading to the decline of the very conditions of creativity that started it in the first place, which is why we need an AI commons now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fenwick. Now, after this question about policy and how do we organize in society, Sarah will tell us a bit more at the end of the spectrum, and especially starting from festivals, which is where creative practices kind of come together and emerge, and also discourses about creation are being carved out. So here you go.
Thank you, Pia. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Thank you for the invitation to Enlaçat. And of course, big shout out to Entertain AI for organizing this incredible event. And I'm really happy, just as a side note, that there's space to have a conversation that is as provocative as this one, and as shocking as the description might be. It's also somewhat necessary to be having these level of discussions. So I work for a festival named MUTEC. For those who have not been to MUTEC before, thank you very much. We're a nonprofit based in Montreal, and our mission is dedicated to the development, but also to the dissemination of digital creativity through music, sound art, and audiovisual art. We arose from the thriving rave scene and experimental new media scene that was coming out of Montreal in the 90s. And we have a festival that we organize every year in Montreal in August, but we have chapters all over the world in Barcelona, Buenos Aires, Tokyo, Mexico City, Dubai, the list goes on. And so I want to talk to you about my personal form of resistance, going back to Pia's initial speech at the beginning of the panel, which is festival making. So I'm going to talk about festivals, and I'm going to deviate a little bit from AI, but I promise you we're going to get back to AI. Just bear with me for a few moments. So I like to say that festivals are sites of resistance. And if you look back to the history of festivals, you can trace a sort of inherent radicalism in the way that festivals have been traditionally organized. On the surface, festivals are great. They bring together fans, publics, audiences, artists for one big joyous event of entertainment. But if you dig a little bit deeper under the surface, there's a lot more there. There's community, there's solidarity, there's love, there's radical support, mobilization, collective meaning-making, and space for provocation, but also failure, which is super important. So to that extent, I really like to think of festivals as these important ideas, processes, communities, and also a necessary incubator for creativity. And it really does become, in this context, necessary infrastructure for the way that we organize, but also for the way that we support the arts and move certain conversations forward. The context of this panel is a little punk, a little anarchist, so I couldn't get up here on stage without talking about TAZ. So TAZ, for those of you who are not familiar, is a concept known as temporary autonomous zone. It was originally conceived by Hakim Met, who is an anarchist poet who published this book in the 90s of the same name. And he came up with this idea of TAZs as this sort of collection or this way of organizing society that completely eluded any type of authoritative top-down way of controlling, that sort of disrupted social norms and power dynamics, where people could self-organize in a way that was slightly utopian. And so I like to think of festivals as temporary autonomous zones, specifically in this context in which, you know, we can gather together to also experience speculative futures in the present moment. And so you're probably thinking, well, what does this have to do with AI? I'm getting to it. So essentially, at MUTEC, we are an artist-driven organization. So we work a lot with artists, and we have a lot of different initiatives that we co-shape with artists themselves that have to do around AI and ethics. It's quite central to our values as an organization. And so we've developed a few tenets of how we wish to engage with AI and how we also wish to support artists in the way that they're working with AI. And one of those is consent, which might seem very basic, but it's very important. And I wanted to share a quote from dear friends of mine, Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, who are AI artists, but also huge nerds. We love nerds. They recently were featured in this interview and said this quote that I thought was really beautiful, and I think it really resonates with this present moment, which is, we're pro-AI and we're pro-consent. Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. So what this means is essentially you can be pro-AI, you can be pro-development of technology, which we are, and I believe we all are on this panel. But you can also be pro-ethics, pro-consent, and that is also okay. And that is something that I think is really important when we're looking at the role of artists and how AI is changing rapidly. And then beyond that, we have to keep it human. I mean, that's the theme also of this conference. But I wanted to also briefly touch on intelligence and how, often we're talking to artists about AI, and yes, there absolutely needs to be this kind of larger understanding of different forms of intelligence too, for us to even be able to encourage and grasp the role of AI in creativity. And so here's a photo of Dr. Ruha Benjamin, who is a personal hero of mine. She's a scholar, sociologist, professor, AI ethicist. What doesn't she do? She does it all. And she always talks about two different types of intelligences or imaginations. One is ancestral, which is sort of this accumulation of wisdom, know-hows that's been garnered and gathered from society, specifically marginalized folks from over the years. The other is this idea of abundant imagination, which sort of challenges our sort of conception of imagination as a luxury, or perhaps something that we take for granted, and repositions it as a vital resource. And in thinking, when we're talking about AI and we're talking about incorporating AI in creative practice, well, where does abundant imagination come into play, and how does that frame our conversations? And so festivals, bringing this back to festivals, we have a responsibility to be able to support and work with artists to be able to collectively shape the future of AI. As festival makers, as cultural institutions at large, we are accountable to artists, we're accountable to the public, we're accountable to our funders for being a leader in what that means and what alternative AI could be. I'll kind of go back to previous conferences today where there's this underlying sentiment that if no one else is going to shape the future for us, then we should. So I cannot underline this enough. And last but not least, I really wanted to talk about climate, because without the environment, there are no festivals, but there is also not artificial intelligence. So we have been in conversations a lot with artists over the past years, and one of the biggest points that comes up is sustainability. And a lot of artists really want to work with artificial intelligence, but they're also super aware and slightly terrified also of the carbon footprint of the work that they're developing. And so we have launched an initiative called the AI Ecologies Lab. It's an interdisciplinary artist residency that is happening this year, accumulating with a in-person hackathon sprint at the SAT this June. And we're really excited to kind of incubate and help artists in the development of 6 AI tools that will have the capacity to create a more sustainable ecological cultural sector at large for Canada. It's a project that is supported by La Ville de Montréal and also Canada Council for the Arts. And we have wonderful partners, including Applied AI Institute, La SAT, Milieux Institute, and also Abundant Intelligences, who's also an incredible organization. You should definitely be on the lookout for them. They're a research project that's dedicated to incorporating indigenous knowledge systems in the way that we develop AI, going back to this idea of ancestral and abundant imaginations. So yeah, festivals rock. Support them.
Yay! Thank you so much to the three of you. We have like 10 minutes to have a little discussion, and there's something that kind of strikes me, which is a kind of common thread of what you say. And I mean, I'm a little bit of the philosophy nerd, you know that. So there's this French philosopher called Félix Guattari, which spoke about the three ecologies. And what you've been saying, like for me, kind of connects like these three ecologies, the three ecologies being the environmental ecology, the social ecology, and the mental ecology. And I think that it's something that I'd like us to discuss a little bit, and maybe we'll start with like one of the examples, which is what you showed. Like basically, it's like your work, Arcia, is about having better content, which is like better mental hygiene somehow, to have like content that makes sense. But something that you didn't really mention is that the kind of models that you use are small data models, and they have a much smaller ecological imprint. So could you start from that and tell us a little bit about that, and like maybe you can, and also it respects copyright, which is social ecology.
Yeah, absolutely. We have been exploring this idea of small data for creative practices at the Meta Creation Lab for Creative AI. And although I present like 60,000 samples, comparatively that's super small compared to what we are talking about in terms of big AI, billions of data points. There are some key aspects to it. First of all, we are promoting the idea that the data set is in full control of the artist, either ethically acquired or created by the artist. Also, the types of networks, there is this tendency of moving towards the latest, shiniest AI system, and everybody is in this constant state of FOMO that if Flux is now available, we should all move to that, and that's better for everybody in terms of creative practices. And we are kind of abandoning the networks that were available 4 years ago or 5 years ago, which provide interesting affordances and lots of creative possibilities, but kind of the hype moves. And we are staying with those networks that can be trained and run on personal computers, which with like tiny footprint, with a lot of creative authority over the whole practice, from data sets to creation. And of course, with a lot of freedom for artists to explore and navigate and change and bend the networks and do all sorts of tricks that just not possible, either not feasible in terms of resources that is required with big AI models, or just not possible in terms of technical abilities that they want. One of the projects that we started is Autoloom, an open source GAN-based small data system that promotes these ideas in terms of providing a nice GUI for artists who don't really know how to code, and they just want an ecosystem that provides them with all these possibilities.
Thanks. Does any of you want to react on what is said, or okay. Questions? Do you want more questions? Fenwick?
Yeah, I mean, I love the Guattari three ecologies, and so as a theory nerd, I'm happy. But I do think, like, one of the points I just want to make is that I feel like artificial intelligence has really put at the forefront these types of ecologies as something that we need to value and protect. And I think things like copyright and intellectual property, I think, have been proxies for how do we actually allow these ecologies to thrive and flourish. And I think, to me, and Sarah, I was really thinking when you're talking about, you know, ancestral intelligences. This is something that comes up with culture, but, you know, as a settler and also a member who has the privilege of being a member of abundant intelligences too, it's like also being mindful that these are the types of things, these resources, what we might call them, that partially AI has made us have to rethink how we value and take care of. And I think that to me is really central in all these works, is not letting the kind of newest technologies or trying to keep up with innovation let us lose sight of what's really become evident thanks to, you know, better or worse AI, like the environmental impact, the cultural impact, the kind of biases built in. And so that to me is why I feel like the AI is worthless and worthwhile, because it really helps us make sense of what are the kind of real questions we'd be contending with right now.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, it's something I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, is my relationship to AI, as if it was some type of a romantic or, you know, a friendship. But it's sort of becoming more and more apparent now, at least, that we all have our own kind of unique relationships to AI. You know, is it monogamous? Is it non-monogamous? I don't know. But essentially, everything, yes, polyamorous, but essentially everything now is changing in the way that we think and the way that we create, and we're having to incorporate or we are choosing to incorporate these new tools into our daily lives. And in terms of creation, well, that's just changing the game. And I think that there's also a certain amount of literacy that is required in order to also properly understand, what is the role of ecology in this equation? Because, I mean, yes, ecology is also a bit of an abstract term, right? It could be defined in so many different ways, but ultimately it's like, okay, what is the common understanding of all of that? And then from there, what are the next moves?
Yeah, I mean, the question of literacy is really, really an important one, I think, because like my perception today is like, if you look at funding, you have to do AI, whatever it is, right? And you will get the money. And like nobody really, like very few people actually understand what is AI. And I personally propose that we stop using the word artificial intelligence because it's not what it does. Like, I'm for using algorithmic imitation because AI is a statistical parrot. It imitates, it finds patterns, and it reproduces these patterns. And if we thought this way, it would change a lot of the way we think about this. It's more than a tool, it's a medium, and it's a big shift. And everybody's excited about this big shift that is coming. But for me, we are at the same point that we were in a dot-com bubble, right? Everybody's getting crazy about AI, and everybody gets woo, 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 and then it will crash. I mean, and the dot-com bubble crashed, and it impacted the poor, like the poor and the people without resources. So we are privileged, and we can have the fun and do the buzzwords, but ultimately we will not be the ones impacted. So let's be mindful about that, I think. And I think it would be really, really important that like the policymakers and everybody with like some kind of power today has more literacy about what AI actually does, how it works, how it's fabricated, and what are all of the chain of this thing. Because it's not an abstract, thing in like the singularity, as I said in the beginning, I think is bullshit, if you can allow me the word, pardon my French. But yeah, I think this question of literacy is really important. And maybe does one of you have something to say about this question of literacy?
Yeah, I just want to add a point about generally what you mentioned. I think we talk about how certain communities are excluded from AI, how their imaginaries are changed because of the way the mainstream AI is working. But I think what is sometimes less discussed, of course we assume that there is benefit to art practices, but we may need to delegate that decision-making to the community itself with a platform that gives them the agency to decide whether or not they even want to incorporate AI into an indigenous art form, which is harder to determine because there needs to be that integration, the use, and then the evaluation and the decision-making. But I think that discussion sometimes happens less frequently. We kind of take for granted that, yes, of course, we want AI will have some sort of benefit for all of the art forms.
And I just wanted to say, one part for me, because my talk I feel like being critical, is that I get quite excited about being a Montrealer and in Montreal because of what's happening here. And I think with SAD or MUTEC or the collaborations with Meta Creation Lab, I actually feel like I want to kind of, as the kind of academic invited on stage to be part of this, I just want to say that to me, it's like, how do we actually work out those solutions? And that's what I'm so excited about is happening here, is those discussions that are happening in the Montreal community, that I think is something that in all this kind of burst of innovation and creativity, we might just not appreciate as much just the work that I see on this stage here in trying to think through this question of AI in ways that are different than we're seeing AI being proposed. And I think that is something really to be excited about what's happening in Montreal.
A closing word?
Accessibility. I guess.
Yes.
Also, kind of tying this together with literacy is also resistance. Is also, finding ways to make AI accessible and sharing knowledge, and specifically within an artistic practice or an artistic context. Often the artists that we work with at MUTEC, they're emerging, independent, and they don't have resources, and they need a platform. And so how do we kind of help and support that level of creation in a way where the technology is accessible?
Perfect closing words. Thank you. Oh.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.